Welcome to Reading Rule, y'all, where we talk about all things rural YA literature and to the rural authors who write it. I'm your host, Dr. Shay Parton, and I'm excited to talk to you about today's topic at hand. If you're a teacher, student, or community member in a rural community, my hope is that the content here honors you and your experiences by discussing and analyzing books that can serve as a mirror for you. If you're an urban or suburban teacher, student, or community member, this series is for you too, and I hope that it can provide nuance to the stereotypical depictions of rural people so often seen in popular media. So come on in, and let's get to it.
Prologue. Winter's always talking. Her breath frosts the tavern window, but I can still hear the wind whispering outside. A voice slips through the crack in the pane, tugging curls from my snarled white braids. "Come out and play," she says. But our tutor would never allow it, not with the blizzard setting in. I trace the crystals growing on the glass and let my eyes wander across the ice rigs parked in the lot outside. If I had a rig, I could play in the snow all day long and not risk frostbite. That red truck there isn't so large, and my 10-year-old legs have grown long in the past year. "Tell us a fairy story, Mr. Dittemore," Lenore calls, suddenly there, tucking a dish rag into the crack, shutting Winter out. "They're histories," our tutor corrects. "The majority doesn't like us learning histories." "We'll tell them they're only fairy tales then," Mistress Left Leg drags as she crosses the room. "Come, bring Sylvie, and we'll talk by the fire. The night is growing cold." "I've boiled chocolate," Lenore says, her fingers closing around my wrist. "Mistress going to tell us of Sola and Begin." "She's told us of them before," I answer, my thumb playing on the latch. Lenny always knows when I'm plotting an escape. We were the same once, both of us wanting to get away, but not anymore. Not since Mr. Dittemore came. Now when I look at my friend, all I see are the differences between us. Her auburn hair carefully plaited, her woolen skirt mended, her face scrubbed clean. Without Lenny's reminders, I'd forget to change my trousers. "Please," she says, "I like the stories." "Can't I listen from here?" "It's so cold," she says. "Come to the fire." I let her drag me to the hearth, where our tutor has taken up her chair. Lenny and I settle in shoulder to shoulder, passing a mug of steaming chocolate back and forth. Mr. Dittemore stabs at the fire with the charred end of her cane. She tugs the cape more tightly about her shoulders and shakes her graying hair from the collar. A shard of black marks one of her pale eyes, and just now it sparkles with magic. When at last she opens her mouth, her voice scratches with the story Lenny and I have heard many times before, a story only one of us believes. "Long ago," Mistra begins, "when the withered seas were but a splash of water, there was Sola, a being of great imagination and light. In an act of benevolence, she selected a drop of sea spray and bestowed upon it her character, warmth, and a desire to create. She kissed his face and called him Begin." Hey y'all. I hope wherever you are that you are safe and warm. The one silver lining of the weather down here we've got going on in Texas is that it makes for the perfect time to review, analyze, and just otherwise discuss Shannon Dittemore's Whippoorwill Award-winning book, Winter, White, and Wicked. It's literally freezing here today, and there's a coat of ice on pretty much everything, which really doesn't happen that often. Like, the wind chill was like 18 degrees or something, and we're supposed to get more wintry mix, which Texas is incredibly incapable of handling. So as Dittemore writes in the first line of Winter's sequel, Rebel, Brave, and Brutal, winter really does bite. And I apologize for my voice. I've got a kid in preschool, and she brings home lots of bugs, and so this is just the state of my voice right now, and I hope you'll bear with me and that it's not too offensive as you're listening. So for the summary, in Winter, White, and Wicked, we follow the story of Sylvie, who is twice orphaned and lives on an island called Lace. It has been cursed by eternal winter, and despite her circumstances, she's tough. She manages to carve out a space for herself as a trucker. In her truck, she enjoys the solitude and the favor of Winter, a spirit who has served as her protector since she was a little girl. She likes the road because it doesn't ask her annoying and difficult questions. Her best friend and the closest thing Sylvie has to family, Lenore, runs off with the rebels. To save her, Sylvie must make a haul with her truck later in the season than anyone else would have dared to do for a man whose reputation precedes him, Mars Dresden. Sylvie and Mars, along with his team, Hyla, a giant warrior woman, and Kin, a shiv boy with skin like stone, will make the journey together because Sylvie will do whatever it takes to save Lenore. Along the way, they face incredible danger, including Winter's wrath, and Sylvie has to make some pretty tough decisions. Winter White and Wicked is full of both action and emotion, and an engaging story ripe with opportunities for critical analysis, and I really can't recommend it enough, so I hope you'll get a copy. It was so good. So I have a confession to make. I am not a fantasy reader. I don't know if it's that I'm too impatient to take the time to work out all of the world building, or if I don't like that I don't know exactly how to pronounce some of the words. So, for example, in the reading of the first few pages that I did at the beginning of this episode, I have no idea if the names that I said were really as Dittemore envisioned or heard them in her head as she was writing. I don't know. I don't know if I pronounced them right, and that kind of bugs me. But maybe it's also that I don't really have imagination for it. I don't know. But what I do know is that I usually give wide berth to fantasy stories. But the great thing about being on the Whippoorwill committee is that I don't get to choose the genres I read for that. So I end up discovering books that I love, even though I would have never picked them up of my own accord, which is super cool. And also just like really unnerving to get out of your comfort zone in that way. So I was just as surprised as anybody else when I found that I actually loved this book. I mean, it's like Frozen meets Ice Road Truckers. The society featured in the books share many of our same problems, though in somewhat different ways, and it invites for a lot of critical thought surrounding those issues, which I'll talk about a little bit more in just a second. And then plus, Sylvie is a total badass, and I am a sucker for a powerful female lead. So that was really appealing to me as well. One of the things that I had never considered before was the existence of the rural anywhere but realistic fiction. That was initially challenged for me when I read Monica Rowe's short story, The Unhealthy Breakfast Club, in Nora Shalloway Carpenter's Rural Voices anthology. Because in it, one of her characters says, "What are fantasy books about? Kids from the sticks who become heroes. And when they get picked on or pitied from being from some District 12 backwater, you root for them even harder. You know everyone who gives them crap will get karma in the end. And then when the quest is over, a lot of them go back to their villages or districts or wherever, and they've succeeded. How often do you see that in non-fantasy stories?" And I had very honestly never given this any thought, but when I read Winter, I was reminded of it, and I started thinking about the possibility and opportunity that reading rural spaces in fantasy books gives readers for really deep consideration of what it means to be from a rural place, what it looks like, what those experiences are like, and how those experiences map onto and into fantasy worlds and characters, and what that means about the real life experiences of rural people. While Lace is a fictional place, its people, its structures, and economic systems reflect our own in ways that can open up deep conversations about what's happening in our world and the things that structure our existences in realistic rural spaces. And what the crossover there looks like. And so I'm just going to talk about a few. One is faith and religion. There are various connections to the cosmology of Lace and the existence of Winter to other world religions and belief systems. So exploring how the role of religion and faith both function for the people and people groups in the novel can help us think about the ways that they shape our own world, thinking about the correlations and connections between faith and religion and tradition and power can lead us to examine those very things in our own world. Another theme is racial systems and history. There is a clear distinction drawn between the different peoples in this world. The majority, the Shiv, the Curse, the Paradians, they're all positioned differently within lay society based on their connections to and or distance from the gods of their creation. And because we read the word through our world and our world through the word, I found myself reading certain people groups as analogous to racialized groups in our own society, even though they may not be described as or look exactly like the people groups in our own society. The way they're treated and the way that power functions is very similar. And so thinking about that with students would be really interesting. And I don't know whether or not that was intentional on Dittamore's part, but regardless, it is possible and it makes for an interesting discussion. There are also correlations to history and the teaching of history, in that remembering is really important to the Shiv and the Paradians, but not the Curse. They don't see the point of it. So with today's movements to suppress some of the most important and painful parts of our nation's history, this has the potential to open up conversations about the role of history in our understanding and knowledge of the world and ourselves, and what that means for how we move forward from our past. And because these conversations can cause a stir and even cost schools accreditation in some states, I'm wondering about the possibilities for fictional worlds like this to be proxies for our own, in a way that these conversations can happen, but that they are divorced enough from our own reality that they don't send up red flags. Because you're just talking about the world of the story, right? Like, those are into the standards. Knowing the world of the story, understanding how setting plays a role in the story and characterization, like, all of that's in the standards. So I feel like you can make an argument for having these conversations in a way that might save you some grief from the anti-CRTers out there. So that's also something that this book made me think about in terms of opportunities for use of fantasy in classrooms. The last theme I wanted to talk about was economic systems. I don't think it's a coincidence that people are mining coal, K-O-L, from the mountains on Lace for the majority. This was one of the most striking connections for me, the depiction of a resource extraction community, because that's what pretty much all rural areas are. If you live in a rural area that has had an important resource, whether that's the soil for farming, whether that's the mountains for mining, whether it's gold mining, and not coal mining. I mean, pretty much everywhere has had some sort of resource extraction experience. And so reading books like this and making those connections are really important. I mean, the move from slavery to sharecropping, from family farming to corporate farming, from mining and fracking and drilling for oil, rural people in places have long endured being made to work for someone else's gain. In one scene, Sylvie and her crew come across some rangers discussing coal miners, like dousing them in coal without protection, which essentially is killing them. And her description of that is haunting. Dittemore writes, "Coal miners lining the road to our left and right. Unlike those wandering the town center looking for food and drink, these laborers clearly don't have any standing with the majority. They're underfed and underclothed, likely indentured servants of lesser citizens who couldn't find work elsewhere. Their coveralls are smeared head to toe in coal, black dust shimmering in winter's light. It's not just the standard dusting that comes with the job either. This is intentional, excessive, and dangerous." So long time and excessive exposure to coal could lead to hallucinations, madness, addiction, and death. And like the resource extraction communities in our own world, this extraction doesn't benefit the miners. It benefits the majority. So despite the hazardous nature, because it's the most valuable commodity. Dittemore writes, coal is a mineral that amplifies things, makes them more than what they are. It's used in all sorts of goods, cosmetics, medicine, petrol, but of all the islands on the weathered seas, it can be found solely in the mountains of Lace, and as such, only the majority is allowed to mine it. But the members of the majority don't do the mining. The quote continues, they tell us it's so the council can ensure the proceeds benefit all the islands under their control, not just a small smattering of mountain folk, not just the ones digging it from the rock. But because of the way the majority has built systems on Lace, the miners continue to mine even when it kills. Coal and its relationship to larger societal forces on Lace all but beg to be used as a frame to examine the extraction processes and power dynamics that go with them in our own world, including the way that those lead to climate change, to the opioid epidemic. There are so many things that you can discuss in connection to this, especially when it comes to thinking about social class and economic systems. So these are just a few of the important issues and corollaries to our own world that exist in Winter, White, and Wicked. There are so many more that are connected to gender and class and equity. And overall, I think one of the most powerful things, again, about this book is that it is fantasy, because it provides that little bit of a buffer between Sylvie's world and our own, and allows readers and teachers to discuss the problems of today through an intermediary, almost addressing these issues as hypotheticals, even though they're really not. So I hope you check it out. We'll put a bookmark in this conversation and pick it up next week when I discuss some teaching ideas for winter. So stay safe and warm out there if you can.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and keep it a viable endeavor for me, it'd be great if you would like and comment on the YouTube episode. You could talk about what you liked most or what you walked away with. It'd also help if you'd subscribe to the channel. You can also head over to the Support Us page on the Literacy in Place website. There you can learn about all the different ways you can support this work. Like, you can like and follow the website itself, find out where to engage with us via social media, and go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or you could shop our storefront on bookshop.org to get the book featured in this episode or any other books that catch your eye. You could also buy us a coffee at coffee.com and donate once or set up a recurring donation. All of this would be immensely helpful in keeping this show going. So thanks a bunch for doing what you can. Well, that's it for this episode. Until next time, y'all come back now, would ya?